Hello, SmartBear community. I'm welcoming you in the 7 common API testing mistakes series with Robert Schneider. Hi, Rob. How are you today?
Hello, everybody. I'm doing great. Hope you're all doing great too.
So with Rob, we have already recorded 4 mistakes. We have already explained four common mistakes that can be made during API testing, and you can review all of those videos in the current playlist if you are interested in. And Rob, which mistake are we going to cover today?
Sure, this one is called Only Test Positive Scenarios, and I'll tell you all about that. So, as we said in the last session where we talked about reusing functional tests for security and load tests and kind of tied that in with everything we've covered so far in this series, here's another one that if you do the things that we recommend earlier on in the series will make it a lot easier for you. But let me tell you about the mistake that people do, and it's very often. When you have a fixed set of test cases, very often what people will do is they will only test a positive outcome. In other words, let's use a hotel reservation system. And in a hotel reservation, you could think there's going to be, maybe 10 different bits of information that's going to be in there. Your name, the dates, the hotel, the number of beds, special requests, and so on. When you have a relatively small number of test cases that you're trying to use with hard-coded data, it's very tempting to fall into the trap of, let's come up with a good hotel reservation scenario. We're going to give them the right information. Maybe we'll do a bad one occasionally. But a lot of times people will just simply test the positive outcomes. They will send in the right name, the right dates, the right room type, the right beds, the right payment method, and so on. And they will get back, in the case of a web service, you won't get a SOAP fault, and in the case of a REST API, you'll get back a 200 HTTP status code. And you'll say, this positive outcome is good. I sent in a good reservation request. I got back a success. We can move on. Our system is capable now of dealing with good reservations. And when you're doing a relatively small number of test cases, you might fall into that trap much more often. We think a better way of doing it is to, and this kind of ties into the notion of data-driven testing that we covered earlier in the series. Why not test not only positive outcomes, but test negative outcomes? I'm going to send in a request for a reservation for 4 years in duration, or for a negative 4-night hotel stay, or for beds that we don't have in the hotel, or for an empty last name, or for an invalid credit card. I just rattled off about 7 different negative tests. And a lot of times people think, well, the API is going to send me an error. It's going to cause my test case in the world of SOAP UI to fail. But no, you can actually configure SOAP UI so that it will look for 404s or 500s or whatever the HTTP status code that's indicative of an error or a SOAP fault, what have you. So what we recommend is in the same place where you drive your APIs with data, you drive your tests with data, imagine, let's say, it's a 10-row spreadsheet. In that spreadsheet, you have the name and the date and the beds and all that. One row after the other, each row representing a different test scenario with one test case that ingests all of that. Row 1 could be a valid row, which you expect alongside with your input data, you have a status code expectation of a 200. And you can assert on that using a testing tool such as SOAP UI to say, in this positive case, I called the API with good data. I expect to see a 200 in the response. You evaluate that in the response. It's there. Great. You move on to the next row. The next row in your data is a negative test. This row we expect to cause an error in the API. So it's going to be, in this case, maybe it'll be an empty last name or something like that. In the column where you keep your expected HTTP code, you don't put a 200, which is a positive. You put a 404 or whatever your API uses to indicate an error. Then you can simply go through row by row, positive, negative, whatever you decide to do. These two things now intersperse in the same data source, and you are covering your API in a much more comprehensive way. Not just looking for things that should throw a good response, but looking for things that should throw a failure, negative testing, all together in one data source.
Okay, again, that sounds very reasonable as all the mistakes that you explained to us.
If you think about it, if you're using hard-coded test cases, you may even be doing a little bit of negative testing, but I can guarantee you, a lot of times the trap that we see people fall into is that they will have hard-coded test cases for these various scenarios, and then it becomes kind of time-consuming and tedious for them to create a new test case with yet another new set of scenarios. But when you use data, especially dynamically generated data, and you have it in some kind of source of information that you can feed to your APIs alongside with what you expect the API to return, you're able to plow through these in a much more efficient way. And then when people come up with new scenarios, which they always do, you don't write a new test case. You simply take the existing data source and you add a row into it that represents, let's say, a new negative scenario. So as you go through this, by the way, this is a great way of uncovering really hard to find bugs, because let's imagine, this is a very common thing, when you're doing negative testing, you're trying to get your API to bring back something you don't expect to see, right? Or you want to see that those values are in line with what the let's say the HTTP status code is. But you could have a scenario where you're sending in, for example, a bad reservation. You expect this bad reservation to throw a 404, right? It's the dates are null or the payment method is some weird thing, and yet it takes the reservation. And then you expected an error, you got back success. That's a problem. You need to alert your developers to that thing. Likewise, you send in what looks to be a good reservation. Turns out there's some hidden bug in your API that causes that reservation to throw a 404. You expected 200. Once again, go notify your developers. But this level of comprehensive coverage is only possible if you look at the API from all perspectives and try to break it at all times, along with trying to make sure that it returns the right positive results to you.
Okay. So, and I'm just trying to create more scenarios and to continue the conversation, to continue our previous conversation about when we were talking that it is necessary to unite secure testing, load testing, and API testing. So this is one of does it make sense to do, for example, load testing together with positive API testing or only with negative? So does it make sense to do load testing for negative tests?
It's even more so in a lot of ways, because if you think about it, if someone is placing your API under attack, or just the kind of volume you're going to see in the real world, a lot of times things come in that are malformed, or they're not properly structured, or there's missing data. So yeah, if you're going to do proper security and performance testing, you need to be subjecting your API to the kinds of things it's going to see in the real world. And the real world is not perfect. We're going to see bad data coming in. We're going to see negative scenarios. Why not bring that all the way back into the functional testing perspective? And then when you take those functional tests and hand them over to your performance and your security colleagues, they've got all aspects of an API test, both positive and negative, in the same source of information, in the same functional test.
Yeah, sounds great. Thank you. Thanks for sharing such a great example with us. So community, if you have any questions, we're always happy to continue our conversation in the SmartBear community. So just post your comments and we will be happy to reply to you. And next time we will cover several more mistakes. Thanks a lot, Rob, for this video.
Happy to be here. Thank you guys. See you next time. Bye.
See you. Bye.